I do want to start the meeting by thanking Tammy from Catholic Charities. We do have a certificate of appreciation. So Tammy Chambers, if you could come up and accept this, we would like to give you a round of applause. And Linda would like to get a picture. Linda, can you come in? Without further ado, Henry and myself are going to be speaking today. And so if you could please help me welcome Henry up here to share all of his secrets. So I don't think you guys really realize how big of a deal this is. Of course, I get a bar stool that doesn't have a front leg. But you don't realize how big of a deal this is because Henry is about the most secretive landlord I know. And he'll be humble and sit here and say he only owns like a dozen houses. You probably times it by about 40 and you'd be closer. So we've got Henry up here. And so Henry, I'd like to ask the first question. You know, I'm not really worried about how you exactly bought your first house per se, but I'd like to know the story about how you feel like you bought your first big deal.
Well, you know, I grew up in just a different time. You know, the rules were different, the money was different. In fact, I was thinking about it when I was driving over here today. And, you know, we used to have simple assumptions on FHA and VA mortgages where you could pay $35 or $45 and take the property over and you would actually own it. And you didn't have any liability on a mortgage. And it was just a different world that we can't kind of picture today. But I had this story in my mind of where I had bought a property on Kenneth Street in Burton. And it was a nice little house. And it was on three or four lots along the street. And somebody had come to me, and they had some people who were deaf, and they were living in the North End, and whoever came to me said, look, they're being picked on, and they're not comfortable in their neighborhood, and why don't you, you know, if you could help them in some way. So we put them into this house. It was a VA house, as I remember it, on Kenneth Street, on 3 or 4 lots, and we might have been paying $200 a month for it, and we charged them $250 for it, you know. And so that went on well for 6 months, and I was a hero of sorts. And the city of Burton, being the villain that they are, paved the street, and there was 3 or 4 lots with assessments on it. And the first year, nothing happened on the mortgage because we were on the hook for the mortgage. The second year, the mortgage went from like $200 to $400, which was astronomical at the time. And I didn't know what to do either because I knew these people couldn't afford to pay as much as the mortgage was. So I went to Bob Shimowitz at the time and I said, Bob, I said, what do I do? You know, and he said, well, just give him a deed. So I gave him a deed to the property. And every do-good organization you could ever think of calls me up and said, how can you give these people a deed and make them pay $400 a month? You know what I mean? It was just kind of a strange set of circumstances. But that couldn't happen today. It couldn't happen today because, one, there are no cheap assumptions. You know, number two, you don't put people in these houses by the, you know, without any equity or without any cash or, I mean, it was just a totally different world. But we were operating, and that must have been in the early 80s, we must have been operating where $50 or $75 a month per house was enough profit to pay your bills and live a decent life. I mean, again, you couldn't carry a house for $50 a month and ever expect to make a dollar. And I only brought that story up because that's just points out to me the difference between what we do today and what we did in the old days when I first got started. You can't bring the old days back. The bottom line is that today you're probably not going to assume a mortgage, and so you're going to pay the full freight on it. Number two, you're not going to put somebody in for very little down. because money is almost worthless today. What a dollar will buy today, 25 or 50 cents would have bought 10 years ago. You know, in other words, the value of money becomes just inconsequential, because the longer you're in a deal, the less valuable that money is. And we didn't think of it the same back then. We were just thinking about what we could make that month or that year, you know. But today you've got to just look at the value of the money 5 years from now. I mean, there's nobody in this room who thinks if you loan somebody $100 today, if they gave you $100 back in 10 years, it would buy as much stuff. We know better, you know. But we were a little dumber back in the 80s. We kind of thought a dollar would be a dollar, you know. So. But, you know, real estate has been a one continuum to wealth. And you just got to find out the right way to make it work, and the time you're in has just as much to do with how you do it as the property is. And, you know, things change. Today I would be the first one to tell you, you know, you can't buy a house at a decent price. You know, it just seems to be the shortage of houses and a shortage of good deals. And if you do get a good deal, you might get one a year instead of 4 or 5 a year. In other words, it's just the luck of the draw maybe, but it's harder today to make a living rehabbing houses than it was a few years ago. You know, I remember just during a mortgage crisis where every street had vacant houses on them that you could buy for 10, 15% of the true cash value, you know. I mean, that's certainly not the case today, you know. So half of operating in this business at this time is operating in the time that we're dealing with. In other words, just because it worked for me 20 years ago don't mean it would work for anybody. Me again, today, you know, and you gotta play by the rules. I'm always looking at a guy like Ed saying, geez, I wish I had all the tools available, the programs and the knowledge that he has. I mean, I had no knowledge when, you know, I was happy with $50 a month, and I was scheduling the thing that I could make $50 a month. That was the criteria, you know. I mean, we've all gotten more sophisticated as time went on. But I think the bottom line is that, you know, you have to adapt, you have to change. And, you know, the guy who made a fortune in 2008 and 2009 and 2010 could very well starve today. You know?
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents.
All right. Well, my first deal that actually I feel like is the beginning of putting me, I would say, on the map was, you know, it was a 2011 deal. It was a house in the city of Durand. It was condemned. It had a thing on the door. I found it on Craigslist for I think he had 11,000 on it, and I walked through the house, and like you could tell that it was not much before this that the poop was overflowing on the toilets. Like they had just cleaned that up. Basement, you're walking across the trash, and it wasn't condemned because the house was falling down. It was condemned because the people were living in it with no water and no heat for an extended period of time, and it was disgusting. And they were living with kids, and the health department came and took the kids out. And so I went and looked at this house, and I ended up buying it for $7,000. But the part of the deal was he had to clean the house out before I bought it. And I drove by right before closing, and I knew he cleaned it out because from that house, like 2 more houses down from between the sidewalk and the street, was completely full of trash. He didn't go to a dumpster, he bagged it all, and the trash man actually took it. I couldn't believe it. So that's one good thing about Durand. If you can actually get curbside pickup, they will pick up a lot of crap. But they're charging for it in those taxes and water bills. But, so I ended up doing all the work on that house myself except the countertops, because I didn't know how to do countertops, and I didn't have a router. But ended up, it was about $13,000 of the house, and I worked on it every day, at least 6 days a week, and it was somewhat like if I made it home by 9:30, I was a hero to my wife at the time, and I was amazing. It was amazing that she even married me during all that crazy stuff to actually spend enough time with her to, for actually her to decide she even likes me. It was kind of a miracle. But it's not really that deal that put me on the map. I took that house, which was paid for, and I went and got a line of credit against it through Financial Plus, 50% loan to value. At the time, the house was worth like $55,000, And at 50% loan to value for such small loans back then, and I think they still will do it, they were doing a BPO instead of an appraisal. And the BPO, I think they're only charged like $150, and the appraisal they wanted like $450. And to me, that that savings was a huge deal. And so I took that, I got a line of credit on for $25,000, and I used that line to to buy my next 3 unit and to rehab several things throughout the time. But there was a time, it's about 4 years, 3.5, 4 years ago, that I used that $25,000, and a partner of mine, John Tremaine, and I bought 80 acres in Holly for $360,000 on a land contract with $50,000 down. Now, 4.5 years ago was not like a building boom. Like the brave builders were just starting to build, and we're buying vacant land. I'm like, this land has, he was getting the listing on it. It was an estate, out-of-state seller, no heirs to the estate, so the attorney really didn't care, and it was on the market the entire previous year. So it's like, oh, Ed, you're special, you found a deal. No, this thing was on the market for 6 months, but the previous realtor didn't sell. We were the next realtor in line, and so John was, we put a deal together to buy the thing, and we were really able to get deed releases in that land contract. So every time we sold a piece of land, we only had to give the seller like $3,600 or something like that. So if I went and sold a piece of land for $7,000, we only had to give them, $7,000 an acre, we only basically give them half of the money in closing. And about halfway through the deal, our land contract was paid off, and then we had all these lots left, free and clear, and we ended up selling most of that deal off on a land contract. And so I'm still collecting money to this day, but it ended up equating to about $500,000 in a year. And I used, it all came from that $25,000 line of credit on that $7,000 condemned house in Durand.
And that reminds me, Ed, I started out in 1978 working for Jim Dowsett. It was Dowsett Real Estate. It was a pretty big company at the time.
And Jim's still around, he works at Cooper.
And there he is. And it wasn't long before I realized that you could make more money if you owned the house than if you just made your commission. And the commission at that time was 25% of the total if you sold it, and 50% if you sold it and listed it. But still, if you owned it, it was just a ton more money. And I had a saying at the time, and I know somebody will snicker, but the truth is, it wasn't that I was so smart. It was just the people around me were just dumb. They just didn't want to take advantage of a situation because they were afraid of the situation. And so what would happen is we sold a lot of FHA and VA type situations back then. And generally what happened is the starter house on the bottom would buy a bigger house, and those people would buy a bigger house, and those people would buy a bigger house. And so you had like 4 home sales in one package. And the weakest buyer was always the buyer for the smallest first house, the starter house, the people that never owned a house before. And so that deal would fall apart because of credit or for whatever reason. But that was the deal that always fell apart, was the smallest deal. And so myself and my partner decided that we would step in using our commission and a small amount of money, and we would make that bottom deal work so the other 3 deals would work after us. And then we would turn around in that market, and of course that market is different than today's market. And rather than sell it FHA, we would hold out a little longer and sell it conventional. And we would be able to make a nice profit out of it. It was a pretty good business to be in. And again, it wasn't that we were so smart. It's just that the people who were in real estate around us didn't want to take a chance. They just didn't want to invest any money. They didn't want to go to second base on a lot of these things. If they could sell it, make a commission, that was fine. But they didn't want to go any further. And that leads me into the second end of it, which is, for some reason, my partner and I always were interested in land contracts. And if I polled the people in this room, more than half would say, I don't want nothing to do with a land contract. I want my money right now, And that might sound good, and it might be the common thought. But the truth is that, you know, the turtle and the rabbit, you know, the guy who takes his money slowly over time makes 5 times the money of the guy who has to have it. And I would always argue that if I give you $100,000 today and you put it in the bank and you made 0.5% interest, what do you got? Where if I have $100,000, even though I might only get $10,000 of it up front, that other $90,000 is bearing interest on a contract at 8, 9, 10%. It's just as saleable, it's a good deal, as anything in life, whether you buy gold or silver or bitcoins. This land contract bearing 8 or 9% is just as valuable and just as, you can convert it to cash anytime you want it, basically.
I get letters every month, at least one, from people wanting to buy my land contract. Somehow they know I have them, and they send me letters all the time wanting to buy them.
But my point was this: that you've got to go against the stream. If everybody in a room says, "I wouldn't take a land contract," then you've got to say, "Well, maybe I should take a look at this because I'm going to be the only person in the room who's going to take a chance on it," or I'm the only person in the room who's going to buy the little house to make the other deals go. You know, if you just go with the other fish in the stream, you're going to wind up just like they are. And the truth is that if 100 people get involved in real estate at any level you ever think about, at the end of 10 years, 5 of them will still be there. The other 95 will be selling Amway or something. But the truth is, you've got to do things a little bit different if you want to expect some different results. And I would tell the people in this room not to be afraid of taking a chance, because real estate will always pay you back, even though it may take more time than you want. There's been a lot of houses that I've wound up with that 5 years later I made a profit out of it. In the meantime, I rented it or did something with it.
Briefly mentioned that deal on Laring Road that I feel kind of like put me on the map and actually gave me the ability to have cash. But there's a few parts of that deal that I just kind of want to let you know how it came together. So like, yeah, it was 80 acres, but we did split it into 11 pieces. And, you know, Flint Surveying, they're right on Miller Road in Swartz Creek there, or Flint Township, whatever that address is right there. And they did all the surveys. It cost me $11,000 to chop it up. And, you know, a meeting at Holly Township, and it was chopped up. Now, the longest thing in the whole process was waiting for the county to issue new tax IDs. But the title company was willing to close the first deal with legals and split approvals without even having the tax ID. So that was good. And that buyer was able to go get a loan through the bank without a tax ID, which I was kind of surprised about. And then another like key factor to the way that deal was structured was that deed release. And you can structure that deed release even into a bank loan. So if you, like Greenstone Farm Credit Services, they are very familiar with the deed release concept. So yeah, you don't have to only have a land contract seller willing to give it to you. You can negotiate that into your loan with the banks also. They just have to understand vacant land. Chemical Bank was a winner pre-COVID for vacant land. Right now, I think the best one left is Greenstone Farm Credit Services. I got a friend of mine right now buying 160 acres, and they're giving them, sorry, you know, rates went up a little bit, 3.27 or 3.29% or something like that. And they were apologizing for giving them a rate of 3% on vacant land in Genesee. So it's and he is able to get deed releases on it, and they don't even want that much of the money, like just the amount per acre that he owes. Now, they're not being greedy with how much they take, because he's splitting off road frontage. He's paying like $1,700 an acre and has, I think, 10 acres sold for 70 grand, or so like 7,000 an acre, and they just want their $1,700 and per acre, and so 17,000, he gets to pocket 60 on the deal, and he paid 200 grand for the whole deal. So it's not a bad thing.
Well, Ed had said to me, earlier today about what we were going to talk about, and he mentioned where the money comes from. And I would tell you that very few people are in real estate haven't borrowed any money, because it's just, the numbers are astronomical for anybody. And very few of us had the money in the bank to start out with. But you know, you get to that point by doing all the right things. You pay your bills on time, you file your income taxes, and when you walk into a bank, they take a chance on you. And if you can get to a point where you have one free and clear property, whether it just turns out to be a very good deal, that you wind up with a lot of equity in it, or you wind up with a lot of equity because you borrowed the money from the bank and you paid it off, but you wind up with a free and clear property that you can then borrow against for the second property or the third property. But I don't think there's any shortcut to good credit and the ability to deal with banks. And I don't think there's any way of being in the real estate business without having a good relationship with a bank or banks. I think the deal comes to you, it's always a little bit more money than you have to spend, and you have to rely on banks or outside sources. And I'll be honest with you, if you borrow money from me, it's going to cost you 10 or 15%. If you borrow money from Chase Bank, it's going to cost you 4%.
But he's faster.
Yeah,
But he
I'm
can close
faster.
a lot
Yeah.
faster.
But the bottom line is, to get the money from Chase Bank, you've got to do everything right. You can't do half the stuff right. You know, the bank's not gonna take you if you stiff the last bank or you don't pay the taxes and everything you own is you know, a month or two away from a foreclosure for tax foreclosure. You know, and there's no way of repairing that. I mean, I know there's a lot of people would tell you they can repair your credit, but the truth is, you don't screw it up to start out with. You realize you're in a business where you've got to be highly leveraged to be very successful. And in order to be highly leveraged, you generally need a bank, credit union, or some type of financing that isn't available just to everybody. In other words, buying a house that you're not going to live in is not the normal. And so when you go to a bank on an investment property, they look at you a little bit different than if you were going to live in it yourself. And I think if you dot the I's and cross the T's throughout your whole life, and we all have problems at different times in our life, but you want to be able to always walk into a bank and sell yourself on short notice, because the best deals are the deals you have to make today, not the deals that you can say, all right, in 3 months if I can get the money, you know, I'll buy it. I mean, chances are in 3 months that somebody else has bought it, sold it, and made a profit off it. You know, you've always got to be ready right now to make that deal. You know, whenever a deal is a good deal, if you don't buy it right then and there, chances are somebody else will, if it's a good deal.
And sometimes those good deals do take a few years of them realizing it's not worth what they think it is, for it to become a good deal. And my first big office building, 37,000 square feet in Flint Township, I chased that deal for 3.5 years before I was, got the guy down in price enough to a point where I thought it was worth doing, and 2, before I found an investor who was willing to put up the $150,000 down payment I needed for half of the deal to do it. And I wouldn't, without the bank and free and clear properties, I would not have been able to take that investor out of the deal, because she went over budget on another project she was in. She needed her money back, like contractually I didn't have to give it to her, and contractually she would have made a lot of money in the deal she was in with me, but she was broke on the next deal and called me and said, hey Ed, can you cash me out? And I said, well, let me figure it out. And I took a building I have in Linden, a 4-unit in Durand that were paid for, and went and got a line of credit through Elka Credit Union, and was able to cash her out on the deal, and now I own the building, you know, no partners, and it's just me. So the banks are, I think, essential. There was one story I read one time that the guy who goes through life in real estate trying to only pay cash for stuff, and then the guy who's willing to use leverage at the end, at the end of their life, the guy who used leverage will have 10 times more than the guy that paid cash. And also, in real estate, it's time that pays these deals off. It's not, being able to save up the money to be able to pay cash for it. We don't pay these deals off. The tenants pay them off, and we collect, the difference in cash flow, throughout the process. People are like, oh, Ed, I bought this deal at an 8 cap. I really feel like I overpaid for it. But you did the deal. Are you covering your debt service? Yeah. Do you have money in the bank? Yeah. Is there any major capital expenditures coming up? No. Well, I think you made a decent deal. Like, who cares if you think you've overpaid a little bit? You're not paying it off. In 20 years, the thing will be paid for, and you can sit back and reap the rewards. and hopefully rents continue to rise and it'll become a good deal in 3-4 years, rents bump up a little bit, and now you're at your 10 cap. So,
You know, the only thing you could over depend on is that in time, that real estate is gonna be worth more money today than it was yesterday. It's gonna be worth more money tomorrow. It may go through an up and down period, but in the end, for whatever reason, real estate has just got a long track record of being worth more money, being a good investment. Just like Ed said, you might have to hold it for a little while, but in the end, it's worth your time and money to do those things, you know. I don't know of anything that would compare to real estate in the long haul. You know, I think about the houses, when I first got into this business in Manfred Heights and National Estates, and, you know, that we were called 29 Niners, or Winchester Village and Schwartz Creek, you know, and then there were 39 Niners and 49 Niners, and today there are 159 Niners. You know what I mean? It's just, there's nothing comparable to it, you know, it's just, it's unbelievable, you know, to have that amount of wealth at your fingertips and not take advantage of it, you know. And the only thing you need to do is you need to use time. The more time that goes by, the more money you make, you know. So, and the way to carry it from point A to point B is usually to rent it out, you know. And that's why I've never liked vacant land, because
I don't like vacant land.
it's just 100% eat to me, and the rental house is always 100% income to me, you know, even though you might miss a month or two a year, you know.
Now, like my breakout deal was vacant land, but my dad was a vacant land real estate developer, built subdivisions, stuff like that. And so like my junior, senior year of high school is the beginning of the recession and, you know, losing the house. My dad's moving to North Carolina and school here, like, and that was, everyone told him diversify, you gotta have a revenue stream. Nope, I'm sticking to what I know. Well, sticking to what he knows, you know, ended up flat broke, you know, 500 acres in Oakland County, and can't sell a lot for half of what he has into it. So vacant land is scary unless you have a quick exit strategy, and you know, every deal you have to take a risk and weigh the risk. And I just saw how much road frontage that deal in Holly had, and so, you know, to build a subdivision is going to cost you crazy money in infrastructure to build it. You know, $25,000 per lot just for roads, sewer, and water if it's available. Whereas, you know, my infrastructure was 11 grand in surveys, and so I had infrastructure. You know, there was no infrastructure, so 11 grand and surveys and some perk tests, and you know, so $1,000 a lot versus 22,000 a lot. So I just saw it kind of as a no-brainer.
But I hate the involvement of government where they don't need to be. And in most cases, it's your money, your design. I mean, they ought to just let you alone. It's your house, you know, but they just can't do that. The uniformity that they want is something that maybe you don't want, but, you know, they're going to make you do it. I don't know how many times I've spent money, just wasted the money to make somebody happy who isn't going to live in a house and isn't going to profit by it, or you just kind of...
So at the board meeting in City of Linden, there's a developer there who's spending his hard-earned money and sticking his neck out there, you know, 2012, in a recession to build 36 more apartment units in the City of Linden, and the guy on the board has the balls to say, I want you to come back next month on these plans. I want to see more of this type of tree and this type of bush, and you know, a few more trees up here. Like, the guy's a gardener, and he's trying to dictate the trees that the development has, and now that guy's got to wait a whole nother month to break ground. Like, let that guy build his building. You know, it's just insane.
I used to go down to Florida, around West Palm, or even around Detroit, in the suburbs around there. And you would be driving down the main highway, and you couldn't tell what stores were in the shopping centers next to you, because they limited the signs, they made you put green trees up to block it. And I mean, they didn't do anything to help you. They may have made it look prettier. But the truth is that if people are starving to death in them stores and offices, being pretty is secondary, you know. But planners don't see it the same way that realists do. And, you know, there's a place on Hill Road. It started out as a Slotsky's Deli or something, and it's a veterinary's place now. And the problem with that property is you can't drive into it. You gotta pull in a half a mile before you get to it, and you have to know that that's the street that takes you to that property. And I'm sure that the reason Slutsky's Deli didn't make it was people passed it and never could figure out how to get in there, you know, it's just, but planners look at things different, and.
So like anytime you buy, if you're gonna invest in vacant land, my recommendation is call the township, and every parcel almost has a zone somewhere on, they have a master plan, and ask them what the master plan is for that parcel, because if it doesn't meet that master plan, and what you wanna do with it, your chances of getting done what you want are slim to none. And that was just some guy sitting in an office building down in Detroit that says, you know, this area over here, I think apartments would fit nice over here. And the board, they bring it to the board, you know, that's not a bad idea either. And they just adopt it, not knowing what some investor down the road, or even caring what the guy who owns that piece of property even cares about what you're doing with it. They just do it.
I was looking at Flint Township, and the township overwhelmingly, twice, voted to legalize marijuana. The people who live in the township, people who vote in the township, overwhelmingly said we want marijuana. The township board on the first off election, where they didn't expect to get a lot of people, put up there that they weren't going to allow any marijuana in the township. Now, you know, it's just maneuvering by a handful of people in a public body against the will of the people. I mean, the will was there to overwhelmingly approve this, but yet in Flint Township, as opposed to the townships around it, you can't have a place. And so I was always involved in the growing of it, and I always analogize that if you've got a building and you grew potatoes in there, they wouldn't care. But if you grow marijuana in there, which is legal, they care. You know, it just doesn't make any sense to me. In other words, it's not, with a grow, you don't have traffic, you don't have retail, you don't have any of the problems that the planners worry about. But yet this township, which is a progressive township, I mean, all have built businesses along Miller Road and Linden Road. It certainly knows the profitability of having a lot of business in your community. But whenever I've talked at the meeting, at a township meeting, you always wind up with a few old timers who just don't believe in marijuana. They may not be the people who voted for it, but they're the people who have the final say, apparently, you know. And that's what you run into.
We're just not gonna allow that devil's lettuce.
Yeah, but that's what you run into whenever it gets down to a handful of people making decisions for a lot of people. And they hurt people like us who want to make things better or different or grow, because they're the other side. They're the people who say, well, we've got enough growth in this township, or we don't want to have to hire more police, or whatever they say, you know. So.
I don't think this needs to turn into our bitch fest.
You gotta be kidding. Me complain.
But like we said, growing with the banks locally, Financial Plus has been good to me. Elga has been really good to me. The biggest problem with Elga Credit Union, in my opinion, is they're so slow. And Team One, I physically have not borrowed money from them. I've gotten proposals on deals that were fine. I just found a better deal someplace else. But they are not, too picky in regards to like the deals that they do, like that 3211 Franklin, that 14 unit. This is on the city of Flint, Franklin, right off Dordt Highway. They lent the money on that deal. Yeah.
Which Team won?
So I was actually getting letters of proposal out of the Traverse City branch, but there's one downtown, and then those people in Franklin, they were working on a Team One in Saginaw. So I don't have a particular lender there. I use Jackie Oaks at Financial Plus, and I've used Brad and Frank both at Elga.
That's a strange property. It's 12 units, isn't it? 11 or 12 units?
12 or 14.
Well, we manage it. It's on Franklin, north of Lee. And it's not a bad building. It's just, it was built for that. But it's in city of Flint, which values are not very sustainable. It's in an area where you're not going to get first-class tenants. You may be lucky to get fourth or fifth-class tenants, And we've been able to sell that through a half a dozen different owners 5 times probably.
Yeah, I know, I've been on it twice.
People from all over the world want to buy this
And they all
property.
look decent.
I don't know, but I'm always amazed when something like that sells as many, and every time it's sold for more money.
Yeah.
You know, you couldn't
Been
make
good to
it
me,
up.
I've had to commission on the thing twice.
But, and it's on North Franklin, I mean, the old east side, you know what I mean, where, you know, most of us don't want to live. But they want to put their money, you know, we had a couple of investors out of Detroit, a couple of foreign investors, and I bet we've sold that 5 times, or it's changed hands 5 times during the 4 or 5
And
years
he
we've
keeps
managed
managing
it.
it.
Yeah, well, yeah, you know.
If they switch it, it'd get really run into the ground problem.
But, and it's not a bad, I mean, it's an income producer, it's just not something that, in an area where most of us would want to buy it or take our mother-in-law to show her what we own, you know. So,
Yeah. Henry, how do you structure your partnerships?
you know, I don't get involved in, are you talking about personally or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just have one?
Yeah, you know, I got to a point in my life where I'd rather do it myself, you know what I mean? I just get tired of people who don't participate and yet want to tell you what to do, and
Yeah.
you know, it's just so much easier as you get older to do it yourself, you know.
He's got enough money.
And I got enough money, yeah. But the bottom line is that partnerships. I had a client who bought a duck blind up north with 4 or 5 other guys, and they all put $1,000 down and bought this duck blind. And you know, they used it for 5 or 6, maybe 10 years, and you know, they all got along, yada yada yada. And one of them decided that there was another duck blind around a corner that they would rather own, and 4 of the 5 guys said, "Look, we'll sell it for this amount of money." The 5th guy said, "Not me, I want more money." You know, and that's what I think about with partnerships. I don't care who they are, husband and wife, brother and brother. People just tend to disagree when money is involved in it. And whether it's a situation of I did all the work and you did nothing, or it's my deal and I just gave you a free ride. I mean, all the things you could ever
Happens all
argue
the time.
about.
Don't expect your partner to do anything.
I mean, yeah, that too, you know. But if you don't need anybody, I wouldn't take anybody else on. And if you wind up in a deal where you had to take other people on, I would advise everybody to have you know, a 37-page written agreement to cover whatever problems might arise, you know. But I've just seen, whether it be the duck blind or other things. I had a land contract. A lady was working at a diner over on Dorrit Highway, and I remember her ex-husband was named Zeke, and she came to me. She just needed this money, and I was going to buy the land contract from her for, I don't know, $30,000 thing. And it was owned by Zeke and her, who had been married before. And so she made the deal with me, and then she went to Zeke, and she said, "Zeke, I'm going to sell the property, and we're each going to get $15,000. And Zeke said to her, "What are you, crazy? I want $25,000." You know. And she couldn't sell it without Zeke, so she wound up on the short end of the stick. And that's what happens when you have partners, whether they're marriage partners or relatives or whatever. There's just no certainty in depending upon somebody else to think exactly the same way you do.
Our operating agreement for the deal we're doing right now is 140,000 square foot, 12-floor deal. Our operating agreement's 27 pages long. Like, I think my standard operating agreement for single members is like 6 or 7 pages. So it's pretty thorough about how everybody gets paid, how capital calls will work. You know, it's all got to be laid out. And you know, it's not my attorney that's doing it. I would use Craig. You know, his $275 or $375 an hour sounds real cheap. This guy's $445 an hour, and the legal fees for this deal are now up to $40,000, just in legal fees to get it done. But it's should be worth it.
Is it worth $40,000?
When
No.
I saw the operating agreement and all, like, he covered the stuff you'd never even think of, you know. And it's all the lease estoppels and the renegotiations, and there's cell phone towers on the roof that we're selling off to actually pay our down payment. You know, so I always look for deals that has something that could be chopped off of it to cover your down payment, recover, a lot of cash or capital to potentially do the improvements to the property. So like there's one I'm looking at right now, I think it's 33,000 square feet of office, and it has a cell phone tower and a billboard. And billboards, will sell off at maybe like a 7.5, 8 cap. Cell phone tower will sell off at a 6.5 to 7.5 cap. And I could this deal's probably, they want $1.2 million. If I can get it for $1 million, I think I can make $350,000 on the deal and have zero money out of pocket. It's just, having something that you can split off. I'm looking at another one right now that has these, I call them voice over IP rooms. They're actually, fiber network rooms in the building, and you can sell those off on a master lease at like a 6.5 or a 7 cap to these REITs. And, so I value those rooms at a 12 cap, just like I do every other rent in the deal, but they're in there on a 10-year lease. So now I can give a master lease to the person, the REIT, and split that voice over IP room off and potentially get the rest of the 14,000 square foot building for free. And then, rehab that and, raise the rents and flip that off and make a quick 150 or 200.
That's why you can pay $3,500 a month on your house.
It's 37.
37.
But, all right, anybody have any specific questions? All right, well, I think we did pretty good with getting Henry to actually share something tonight. So big round of applause for Henry.